Tell me about Lee.
Okay. My name is Lee Elias Dwyer Bursley, and I was born and raised in Shanghai, China, and my parents were Orthodox Jews, and my grandfather was a Sephardic rabbi, and we, all of us kids had our lives planned, and I had to study shorthand and typing, and it came in handy when World War II ended. I got a job right away with the Army Air Force, and it was there that I met my husband, George Dwyer. And after a while, we fell in love, got married, and came to the States. And we traveled for a bit and were stationed then at Bergstrom Air Force Base, Austin, Texas. And I tell you the truth, I was very homesick and lonely. And then, as God would have it, He placed a beautiful Baptist lady next door to me. And she would come over every day and bring 2 Cokes. She really befriended me. And we would talk and talk about China and Israel. I had been to Israel. And so after a while, we got closer and closer. And when I got pregnant, she came over and said, "I'm going to take the place of your mama, and I will come over every day and bathe your son and boil his diapers and his bottles for 2 weeks." And I really saw Christianity in action there. Well, we continued being very good friends. And many years later, when Dan was 4.5, he came in the kitchen, and he said, "Mom, I don't have anyone to play with." And I said, "Well, where is Ramey?" And he said, "Ramey died." And I said, "Oh, come on. What are you saying?" He said, "That's what his mama said." So I quick ran to the phone and called her, and she said, "Yes, Ramey died 3 weeks ago." And I got petrified. This was the polio season. And so George and Doris's husband were overseas. So I called her, and she came running, and we took Dan to the clinic and explained to the doctor. And he said, "Well, really, all we have is gamma globulin." Excuse me. And I said, "Oh, anything, doctor." So he said, "Take him home, keep an eye on him." So we did. And about 2 weeks later, he came down with a very high temperature, and I couldn't get it down. And then about 4 days later, he woke up and he said, "Mom, my neck is stiff, and my legs are so stiff." And I knew it was a sign of polio. So I called Doris, And we took him to the clinic. And the doctor said, well, I'm sorry to hear that, but I'd like to do a bone marrow test. And we will get an initial report and then have to wait on a 24-hour culture to know if he has polio. I said, thank you. He said, take him home, put him in a tub of cool water and try to get his temp down. So we did that. And Doris said right afterwards, you know, we're going on vacation next morning. We're leaving at 5:30, but if somehow you know that Dan does not have polio, call me. I don't care what time it is. I said, okay. So we put him to bed, and I went to bed. And I was so overwrought. It was a terrible time, and it was so hot. I saw the Bible on the dresser, and I went and got it, and I thought I might receive something, but I did not, and I just laid it on me. And all of a sudden, I heard out of my mouth my son's prayers. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. And I was so surprised. And then I got angry. And I said, okay, Mary, if Jesus is really the Messiah, you tell him to let me know by 3 o'clock in the morning that Dan does not have polio. And surprisingly, I fell right to sleep. And after a bit, I heard noises. I thought they were prowlers. So I jumped up, ran in the hallway, and there was my little son. And he said, Mom, I'm hungry. And I said, you're hungry in the middle of the night? Come on, we'll go down and I'll give you something. So I took him down, gave him milk and crackers, sat him at the table. And above the table was a clock. And I wondered what time it was. And I said, well, why don't you look? And I didn't look. And I said, oh, you're afraid to look? And I said, no, I'm not. And I looked up, and there it was, a few minutes after 3. I just froze. I couldn't move. And then this thing started at my head. It was like electricity. And it went down all the way to my feet and buzzed all the way up. And then it began to speed up and just go bzzz, all the way down and up until I couldn't stand it. So I began running. And I was running and running up and down the living room. And then tears started. And I was crying and crying. And all of a sudden, I knew. And I said, I believe. Jesus, I believe. Excuse me. That was the beginning. Excuse me. Soon after, I wanted to know all about him. So I started to study the Bible to look for all the promises. And that seemed to help me. And
Excuse me, you mean promises in the Old Testament?
in the Old Testament.
The Torah?
Yes.
Yeah.
And then saw that it was confirmed in the New Testament, fulfilled. And it was on and on and on, a very beautiful beginning. And I had entered the prayer group, and Bob tried to get all of us to study. So I studied for 4 years and got to be a little knowledgeable, and began to lead a Bible study. And I've been doing it for 30 years. And that was where I met Bob. And as God would have it, we fell in love and got married.
When did George die?
George died when
How old was Dan when George died?
oh, he was grown. He was grown. But George died in 76.
Okay. Okay.
And he had been very sick with heart problems. And the prayer group really helped me. So I was able to handle his death. So it's a very long story, and it has much detail. But now, at the age of 86, see, the Lord says in the Old Testament, you're given 70 years, but if you're strong, you will live to 80. Well, I'm strong. So that's my story.